China's COVID crisis has refreshed horrific memories of the pandemic. Local reports say that long lines could be seen at crematoria in the nation's capital as healthcare nears collapse with the recent surge in cases. China relaxed its controversial zero COVID policy last month, leading to a spike in infections. As a fallout of which, funeral homes and crematoria across Beijing are reportedly struggling to keep up with the rising demand for memorial services. Infections among workers and drivers in the sector are also on the rise. Now, these reports come after a US-based research institute recently said an explosion of China's cases is expected this week, and over 1 million people in the country could die of COVID-19 in 2023. However, Chinese news outlet Caixin has reported deaths after the policy was reformed. Deaths included the outlet's own journalists. Even news agencies reported journalists witnessing about more than a dozen corpses that awaited cremation in the capital. However, it was not clear if those deaths were due to COVID. China, on the other hand, has not reported any official death since the 7th of December, since it eased its zero COVID policy. Now, the Chinese capital of Beijing last reported a fatality on the 23rd of November. China's official infection tally has meanwhile become unreliable after officials eased mandatory COVID testing rules. The lack of official data on COVID deaths has now stirred debate on social media in China as people seek to learn true statistics. Meanwhile, in Shanghai, most schools are going to hold online classes from Monday onwards due to the rising cases. Now, for more on this, we're being joined by Andrew K.P. Leung, who is an independent China analyst. Thanks for being with us, Andrew. Now, China has relaxed its controversial zero COVID policy last month. We've seen a spike in infections, and the healthcare system seems to be struggling with the increased demand. Take us through the latest.
Well, it's been 3 years since China have imposed this very strict lockdowns and also a very strict regimes to contain the virus. And overall, China has been relatively successful in containing the number of deaths. Don't forget that the United States suffered more than 1 million deaths since the pandemics happened. But China's got 4 times the population of the United States and has got a much inferior medical and health system compared with the West. But still, the number of death cases, the number of infections in China have been extremely low. So far, China had been very, very successful in containing the virus overall. But the fact remains that the vaccination rate of certain vulnerable groups, particularly the elderly, had not been very satisfactory. And of course, that these group of people, the elderly, unvaccinated, remained highly vulnerable. But be that as it may, overall, the situation has been quite satisfactory. Even according to independent New York-based research institution called the Elderman Trust Barometer, EDELMAN, Elderman Trust Barometer, based in New York, and they look around all countries around the world and to see which country have the people best supporting their government in terms of management of the pandemic. And China came on top. So China's policy had been highly supported by these people, at least in the beginning, in the best part of this year, until recently, because people's patience is beginning to wear thin after 3 years. Yes. And also, the pandemic has been moving into a kind of endemic, the death rate, even though, of course, there are upwards deaths, even for ordinary flu, there is a rate of death. But then compare with the previous situation, the death rate has been very, very low. And so Beijing took advantage of this opportunity to relax the regime, opening up, trade with the outside world, and then easing the restrictions in the cities, and also even the border with Hong Kong. But at the same time, trying to boost up the infection rate. Now, obviously, there are more cases being reported because the infection of this new virus has been very high. So obviously, people using self-testing kits find that they are, they're effective, but that doesn't mean that the death rate is going to be very, very high.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's increasing, especially amongst the vulnerable groups. And various cities are taking some precautions, but some cities are pretty relaxed about it. For example, in even Guangdong province, and a lot of the restaurants and supermarkets are now opening. So I think that China has going through this stage of transition from a pandemic to an endemic. Right. And experts expect it's going to last for a couple of more months.
Right. Andrew, on that, with the lack of mandatory testing, there is a lack of official data on the COVID deaths as of now. And this, of course, has got people in China trying to seek accurate statistics.
Well, again, this is a dilemma there, because without compulsory testing, it's quite misleading to release any kind of data, because people self-tested, and then if they are infected, if they are asymmetric, in other words, without any symptoms, then they won't get reported. So that's the reason why the central government has ceased to report on these cases, as what happened in a lot of Western countries. I mean, if you go to the United Kingdom and many other European countries, and even the United States, you don't see any more reporting of cases anymore, because the pandemic has more into an endemic. It's just like a very severe variant of the flu. Right. So I think this is happening all over the place now, as countries, including China, are facing this transition. But I think that China is facing an additional problem in the sense of a very relatively low infection rate amongst the elderly group. And that's where they're boosting up the infection rate.
Right. Andrew, thank you very much.
The vaccination.
Thank you very much for joining us and all your valued insights there. WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.